remember I was debating whether or not I wanted to come to the school board meeting. I thought I should go, I might learn something. They were approving the travel for the superintendent and the director of elementary education for attending this. And they said it's right on the schedule and the things they want to approve for the board. And I thought, what is Voice for Equity? So I got my phone and I found out, I got their website, and one of the things I read in there is that they believed in systematic discrimination against women with us, who are systematically discriminated against in leadership opportunities. I went to look at this site. I started reading the site. Most of this PowerPoint is their material with my commentary. So if you go back to the next slide down, so basically this is what they believe. They were established to increase the number of women and leaders of color at the policy table. And our mission is to disrupt years of systematic bias and inequities by working with women organizations and expand the diversity of voices through strategic leadership, equity policies, and community engagements. Is that clear or not clear? A lot of times you read things and you don't know what they exactly mean.
Right.
It takes work. So let's try to define some of these terms. So let's talk about the word equity. Well, essentially the definition of the word equity is it essentially means that everyone receives the same reward regardless of the service they deliver. That's what equity means. Everyone has equal outcomes. And that's been proven to not be effective in building solid societies because people aren't motivated to be the best they can be if they know they're going to get something good enough for little work. And this other word is inequity. When you think about the word inequity, I got to think about this definition. It basically means people are rewarded based on what they provide. So the amount of their service varies, as does their rewards. So inequity is really not a bad thing, because if you're going to have equity, you can't have inequity. And people are rewarded based on inequity, which basically allows people to be more successful, and it makes society run better. And the last one is systematic bias. Systematic bias essentially means that the odds are stacked against you. That people are going to systematically discriminate against you. If you're going to Wright State University, do you think she'd be motivated if I said no? Just be aware that they're systematically going to discriminate against you in getting a job in marketing. Is that going to motivate my daughter to be the best she can be? No. And I know from my professional experience, and I'm sure Tom's going to agree with me, is that a lot of major companies really are hoping they can find enough minorities and women to enter technical fields to help us compete against our adversaries in the Department of Defense. This systematic discrimination against women, as far as I know, does not exist. And even if it did exist, promoting it is not helpful. So let's talk about the next one. Okay, I think I need to go the direction. So basically, what is their work about? These are all direct quotes from their site. So they basically partner with organizations to review their systems or policy structures to improve and advance companies' equity approaches, which means companies need to be more equitable in their decision making. When you want to get your raises, it's basically discriminatory to reward people based on their performance. If you have one individual that can get the work done twice as fast as other individuals, it's not fair to reward them based on their skill or their ability to produce work. They want to have equity approaches, which means people get the same things. In fact, I heard recently that the current administration wanted to basically take some of the FICA score points from people that have good credit and give that to some of the people that don't have so much great credit. But wasn't the whole purpose of a FICA score was to figure out who was going to be able to pay back debts? Wasn't that the point of it? You totally destroy the whole concept by trying to have equity in FICA scores. For many of us, that's really ridiculous and counterproductive idea, but that's where equity leads. Talk about equitable access. Basically, implies a quota system in which individuals put in positions not based on their abilities, but by their racial or gender class. Do you remember that when President Biden said that he wanted to make sure he had a black woman on the Supreme Court? So that the problem with that is basically I think it's Kaniji Brown Jackson. And what's her correct title? Do I call her Judge Jackson? So when you think about Judge Jackson, by the way, she was unwilling to define what a woman is when she was asked. Did people going to really believe that her position is legitimate? Or was she given a handout? Did she really earn the position of being on the Supreme Court? Or was she given it because of equity? Are we appointing judges based on equity? Or appointing judges based on their ability to rule on the rule of law? It's a good question. And equity is penetrating every part of our society. This is just another example of that. Let's talk about their position on equity. But basically, they're basically saying that across many, many sectors, women do not have equal access to cheap executive leadership roles or influential boards. And this often leads to male-leaning perspectives in decision-making with unintended bias. One question someone asked me is, do women not have bias? Is it just men that have bias, or do men and women both have bias? And the other question is that what is causing women to not have the representation that someone thinks they should have? Are they just simply assuming that because there are not more women as superintendents across schools, that there's some sort of systematic discrimination against them? Could there be other factors? I know, for example, that many times in a divorce situation, many times the woman ends up with custody of the children. Or women tend to want to take responsibility more for raising children than men do. Isn't it somewhat true that men seem to want to chase after things more than women? I know these are somewhat stereotypes, but could there be reasons for this other than systematic discrimination? From my experience, companies want to hire the person that's most qualified for the position at hand, the person that can do the job best. And isn't that the right way? And what kind of equity do they want? Is it going to be 50-50? Is it going to be 40-60? Because equity means quotas. That's what equity means. It means quotas. Is that what they're intending? Let's talk about the founder of this organization, Christina Kismato. So basically, her bio says she's founder of voice4equtiy LLC, which is a private company, and a clinical professor at Rosler School of Education. And she is a bold advocate of social justice. That's what I picked out from this, a bold advocate of social justice. Social justice sounds kind of maybe a good idea. It's socially justice, it has the words in it. What does social justice really mean? Let's talk about what the words actually mean. What it means is basically, by definition, social justice promotes equity and teaches students that justice can be applied based on the number of social groups. If your pedigree is basically a group that is privileged, then your justice score should be a little lower. If your pedigree is a group that seems to have had more struggles in life, your score should be a little higher. So basically, we don't deliver justice based on the facts. We also have equitable treatment with some bias. And wasn't there a slide about unintended bias? We don't want unintended bias. But the whole idea of social justice, by design, has bias in it. Another example of my own personal life. I had a contract agreement with someone in a minority group over some properties. And I have a solid case that they probably should have just been liquidated into foreclosure for failure to honor the contract. But the judge has applied equity to it. I must be a wealthy owner. She must be some poor individual. Therefore, they should give her every opportunity to pay the bill. Even if it takes her months, gets behind for months, violates the contract, we're still going to treat her equitably because she's part of a minority. Does that encourage her to be the best she can be? Does that encourage her to strive to make those payments? And the shocking thing about it is it leads her to poverty, having equity, because she's going to figure out how to just get by instead of how to be very successful. Successful people pay their bills on time. Successful people learn how to move capital forward. It should be based on your performance. So this is another interesting thing I ran across. I read the February 2023 article. That was Black History Month. Now, if we were going to celebrate Black History Month, wouldn't we think about maybe celebrating the great individuals that actually were great black individuals? It could be inspiring other people. Could we think about Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery in the South? He was a key advisor to Abraham Lincoln. Could we talk about Booker T. Washington, the things he accomplished? Or what about Harriet Tubman that helped many slaves get out of the South? Should we celebrate these great people of history? But that is not what Christina did. She complained. She talked about, this is a precise point where it's more important than ever that the authentic history of the United States be told. I wonder what she means by the authentic history. I read a book called Black History in Black and White. It's a very good book. Some sort of prize, keep the eyes off the prize. What is the prize she's looking after? We have made progress towards more just and equitable society. So it almost sounds like that she's trying to talk about history to get us towards an equitable society, which basically means she's using the teaching history to put to some objective. And what would that objective actually be? So my thought on this is basically she spends her time focusing history on oppression and victimhood. Isn't that what it basically is? Whenever you have these discussions like the 1619 Project, we look at history to find victimhood to push these agendas. And I do know that the history of America has a lot of problems in it, especially if you look at the time period from 1830 to 1863, where basically a party took over and they had the Dred Scott decision, which basically meant that African Americans are not human. They had the fugitive slave law, which means they could take someone from the north and drag them back to the south, causing a mass exodus of African Americans to Canada. We had the Northwest Ordinance that allowed slavery. All that happened back then. Yes, that was very oppressive. And a whole party came into existence, and we had a bloody civil war over it, where 600,000 died to right that wrong. That's pretty bloody, but we don't use that information to point out that people are oppressors. It's history. We don't leverage history to push an agenda. And apparently that's what Christina is actually doing. She is pushing an agenda to get her end using history for it. It's pretty clear when you read it. It doesn't seem to pop at you right away. You have to think about these things a little bit. So there's a conference in June. And it's interesting how I learned about this conference. I think I already mentioned that I was at a school board meeting where they were approving to travel to it, and I started researching it. But basically, the When Women Lead Summit will bring together equity thought leaders. You know what's so good? You now know what an equity thought leader is. An equity thought leader is someone that believes in social justice. They believe in systematic discrimination against women and minorities. All that stuff is all packaged into equity thought leaders. They think about how to use history to paint a picture of oppression and injustice. So now you know what that equity thought leader actually means. It's amazing when you actually study these things. So basically they're inviting people that are equity thought leaders. We'll bring together equity thought leaders. Now these are some of the sponsors of this organization. You recognize any of these particular companies? So apparently, Equity Warriors are Curriculum Associates Scholastic. Remember all the Scholastic books? Did you know that Scholastic Books is now an Equity Warrior? Which means apparently Scholastic has now aligned themselves an organization that believe in systematic discrimination against women, minorities, social justice, and problems with equity and wanting to push equity, everything. Do these educational organizations truly believe in that? And if they do, that means parents will need to be involved understanding this. And how many parents do you think know about the things I've just told you about? I bet you a lot of them don't, because when you even talk about equity, people don't know what the word means. When you talk about social justice, they don't know what social justice means. It basically means it's not an even keel of what the law says. You're going to weigh their particular ethnic group in your decision making. Now, I found this on their website. This particular person is Maquit Tassant. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right. She's basically a senior advisor, White House Initiative on Advancing Education Equity, Excellence, and Economic Opportunity. So now the White House has aligned themselves with equity, which means the White House believes in social justice. the White House believes that people should not be rewarded based on the skills and value they bring to the table, but based on a quota system. Does this mean that since they're supporting this, that the White House is part of the organization that's creating all these concepts? That our executive branch, it fundamentally is not in alignment with the founders of this country? I know that when the Pilgrims came here, they found out that if people were given a plot of land and had the right to the produce of that land, they worked harder. This is a major step backwards for our country. This is how I actually learned about it. I was at a school board meeting, and they were approving the travel, and at the bottom, it has our superintendent's name and their approval to go to the Voice for Equity in Vancouver, Washington. This is how it all started. This is why it's important for parents to show up at school board meetings. They want to be able to pick up on these things. Because does anyone else in Miamisburg or any parents really know about this trip or why it's an issue? Then, just to confirm it, I found our superintendent's picture and our director of elementary education on their website. Pretty definitive. I've seen the travel approval being done by the school board in the meeting. I've gone to their website, I find their pictures on there. So what action was taken? I figured the first thing I did is I studied the organization. That's what this PowerPoint's based off of, all the research I did into it. I had some other friends help me write some of this stuff because it's a lot of stuff to work through. I even spoke at Kettering about this. Accuracy in Media had basically a video where the, I think it's Mr. Early that works for the Kettering School District. It was said that if they outlaw CRT, they'll find a way to fit it back in. And if they'll basically affirm transgender individuals. And my point of the speech was, I says, you need not to defend Mr. Early because the elements of critical race theory are already in your school. And I was trying to give examples of how they're in Kettering. And the president of the school board gave a presentation at the previous school board meeting, pretty much stating what their policy was on gender issues with transgender individuals, with bathroom use, et cetera, and things like that. And that was half of this stuff that Accuracy Media was pointing out. And I was trying to give examples of this, and I thought I would simply point out that the superintendent of Miamisburg was attending a conference called Voice for Equity, and that organization believes in concepts of critical race theory. And I think the fact that I wrote an email and then another parent showed up and he raised his concerns and he read my material and did his own research and he wrote his own little paper, expressed his own concerns to the school board, because I had contacted all school board members and I basically said, you're realizing you're aligning yourself, this board, and our school district with the beliefs of this organizations by sending our superintendent and sending our director of education to this conference to be speakers. And on their website, they're considered equity champions. The effect was, after a meeting with the superintendent, the action that happened out of that was the planned trip to the Miamisburg superintendent, Dr. Laura Blessing, and Amy Dobson, director of elementary education, to go to this conference was canceled. Now, I don't know this because of our concerns about it, but they chose to not attend it. And frankly, it was, how would parents react knowing what Voice for Equity stands for and knowing their superintendent was being paid to go to this conference at the taxpayer expense?
Wow.
And I think I went the wrong way. So basically, this kind of showed me that you really can make a difference. Some of the key elements is you have to know what's happening first. You have to be aware of what's happening. You have to know the topic and what it's about. And what would happen if parents and concerned citizens objected to the local school board supporting this conference? Because the interesting thing is that if you go onto their website, it lists all the attendees. It lists what school districts they go to. I kind of thought that maybe this approach could be replicated. Because I mean, if you go to their website, by the way, here's my example letter that I wrote. You know, basically for reference, and this is the professional letter, basically saying I researched this organization, I learned about the organization since you, and Amy Dobson are featured speakers at this event. And my analysis basically says that this organization should be a questionable partisan organization promoting a dubious cause, polarizing education and promoting causes that are known to agitate and cause discord among youth. That's a conclusion I came from my research. And it wasn't I just kind of said that. I think I've proven that in this presentation. Those things are really true statements. Voice for Equity promotes the concepts of systemic bias, equity, social justice, and systematic oppression, and distorting history. I probably should have written frames history to push a political agenda. And part of it is that I've learned as I go along what these words really mean. I've learned quite a bit since I wrote this letter back on March 31st. And it says, as Speaker of the conference, you align yourself and Amherst City School District with the values of Voice for Equity and its founder, Dr. Christina Cosmato, which many parents will find objectionable, repulsive, and unacceptable. You should reconsider attending. And I gave her a copy of my research that I spent a few weeks writing on it. And we met, we talked about it, and then another parent expressed their concerns after that, and they elected to not go to the event.
Oh, thank you so much.
Right
My
on,
grandson's
Scott.
in that.
Right on.
That's awesome.
Now, let's talk about the conference some more. If you go to the website, you can see, some of the speakers, keynote speakers. Dr. Barbara Cooper, Secretary of Early Childhood Education, State of Alabama. So Alabama is behind this. And
Wow.
Superintendent of Public Instruction, State of Nevada. So Nevada is in for this.
Wow.
Now, if you're a resident of Nevada, you might be upset to know these things. Cynthia Arcado, rocket scientist, associate rocket scientist, she's not a part of a school district. And then if you go walk through these, if you just kind of, so basically, look at this next slide, just kind of looking through these names. So you have a lady from Illinois. You have, okay, what about Dr. Avis Williams down here? She's the superintendent of NOLA Public Schools in Los Angeles. You think maybe any parents in NOLA Public Schools, Los Angeles, might be concerned they knew that Dr. Avis Williams is attending this conference? So what happens if people maybe inform some of those parents in that city about this? Maybe would they maybe do something about that? Would they object to that? And I've kind of had this idea that what if maybe individuals that took some time to maybe sponsor one of these individuals and to maybe do a Google search and find out maybe where some churches are and perhaps call the pastor and ask them some questions saying, I'm calling you from Dayton, Ohio, and I'm just curious, do you care what children are taught in school? Do you think it's a good idea to teach kids that they're either an oppressor or someone that oppresses? Do you think that we should reward people based on the services they bring to others? Or should everyone get the same kind of thing regardless of what value they bring? And after you get some yes answers, you might ask the question, are you aware that so-and-so, your superintendent at your local school, is going to a conference about the organization that believes, and she's aligned your school district with those belief systems and aligning your community with those belief systems? And that the intent is to go as a equity champion to that conference? Does that suggest that maybe their worldview is to teach equity to the children of your congregation? If you're interested in knowing more, I'll be glad to send you information about it. Maybe you might want to do something about it. Maybe you might want to raise some concerns about it. 2 concerned citizens of Miamisburg took some action and convinced leadership in that district to not attend this. Does it only take 2 people? Is that all it takes? Imagine, and in a bigger picture, what do parents really want from their school? I would imagine a lot of parents would want their kids to go to a school that teaches them, gives them the skills they need to succeed, tells them that you can succeed, and creates an environment where people are comfortable and respectful of parents and teachers. Maybe teaches them real history and not uses history as a tool. Wouldn't those be good skills? And if the parents find out that the school leadership is going a different direction and is interested in teaching some of these concepts of social justice, they might object to it. That's my takeaway from all this. If we can do this in Miamisburg and change the course of our school district for the better, why can't it be done in every school district? That's what I wanted to share with you today. So think about how you can get involved and make a difference in our society.